It's no secret that all of us live with a voice in our head, a sort of self-narrator that narrates everything we do, everything we see, constantly chatting in the brain. And yet it all seems normal. But none of us can stop it, maybe no more than a few seconds, a few moments. And a lot of times, probably most of the time, this voice in the head is kind of negative. It's either daydreaming or fantasizing about the future, or it's thinking about the past, or it's being very critical of ourselves, analyzing ourselves, or analyzing others and people in our life, and in a way attempting to categorize and put things in neat little packages and organizations, filing cabinets in our mind, so to speak. But again, it's all normal. No one questions this. It's just the way things are and basically have always been, right? What was speculation for philosophers for thousands of years. Probably one of the most famous was the Buddha, who really looked at thoughts, compulsive, incessant thinking, as a sort of neurotic tic that he believed could be basically conditioned to a better pattern, I guess, to a better state of presence. And so became his life teaching, which unfortunately would become more of a religion, although it's really not a religion, right? It's more of a philosophy, because it doesn't tell you who God is or what God is, or there's not a set of commandments or laws. It doesn't tell you what the universe is about. It doesn't have a definition for opposing force like Satan. Really, it's more of like the psychotherapy of its time. So it's no accident that today in psychology, so many Zen principles, really core principles of Zen, would find its way into some of the most powerful and effective methods of therapy today. And some of these therapies include cognitive behavioral therapy, is one of the most proven effective therapies, and also dialectical behavioral therapy, which is probably mostly used to treat borderline personality disorder. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy is unique that it observes how your thoughts, especially negative and faulty thinking patterns, can cause maladaptive or negative behavioral patterns. It observed that often is the case, it's not the event in your life that really causes you distress, but rather your interpretation of that event. For example, you're on your way to work and you get a flat tire. You can catastrophize the situation and start thinking, if I don't get to work in time, I'm going to end up homeless because I'm going to lose my job and I'm going to end up on the street. And, you go from a situation where you're inconvenienced, you have to get out, change a tire, you might be late for work, but now you're suddenly having these feelings attached to ideas that, you could be homeless. And that's pretty normal for all of us. That's sort of what the ego does with most things and most events in our life, right? To some degree. It may not always be a catastrophe, but it has a way of embellishing for sure. And it could be events, and it could be ideas of ourselves, negative things about ourselves. So cognitive behavioral therapy attempts to adjust those maladaptive patterns and those faulty thinking and use sort of rational realignment. This is very typical of Buddhism, really. Some of the core principles of Buddhism is alignment with reality as it is, and not giving in to the identification with thoughts and certain stimulus, without exaggerating and embellishing things, but just seeing reality in the present as it currently exists, and not through rose-colored glasses or through some negative film. And it's also found in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, again, because dialectical behavioral therapy differs from cognitive behavioral therapy, and that in dialectical, the therapist isn't helping someone necessarily change their thoughts. They're not just pointing out irrational beliefs and helping them realign to more rational beliefs, but they're actually allowing the person come to these things through presence, which is a really unique approach to it. And why it's unique is because it's not like someone's handing you a program and telling you here's how you should think and mapping it out for you, but rather you're doing the work yourself. You're arriving to these things for yourself, and in that it's actually more meaningful, right? So in those two therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, we're looking at Zen Buddhist principles such as mind-body awareness and mind-body connection, and we're focusing on using the mind to focus and realign to rational thinking to allow the present moment to be, which is pretty powerful. there's something very transformative about just sitting in the present, even in a event such as a flat tire. It's just being there present without automatically jumping to labels and reframing the event itself, but just sitting there for a few moments in the present and allowing reality to sort of resonate for a moment. That said, mindfulness meditation has become really big in psychology today, and essentially it's the stripping of Zen Buddhism. It's taking a sort of a safe technique of Zen Buddhism, and it strips it from any religious connotation or getting into any philosophy. It just observes the technique of Zen meditation and how it can be effective in treatment of things like obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, depression, perception of self. And again, this happens in a really fascinating way. Now, on the base level, it's symptom management. Science has just found that if we sit here, say I have anxiety, and we sit here in the present moment, and we don't focus on our anxiety thoughts, but we just be here now, and we just learn to just allow and to just accept and surrender to the moment, that within a little bit of time, something fascinating happens, that those anxieties start to diminish greatly. And if you can sustain this practice repeatedly, it starts to reduce symptoms of anxiety over a longer period and to a greater scale. And you can actually treat anxiety very effectively this way, or depression. Anxiety is a lot of fear, a lot of worrying, a lot of exaggerating, a lot of identifying, falsely identifying, irrationally identifying. Whereas depression is a lot of, in a similar way, thinking negatively of the past, usually looking at something with sort of a doomed perspective. But either way, whether you have anxiety or depression, chances are you're looking at something and perceiving something in a way on an analytical level that's very negative or fearful, which in return starts to affect your behavior. And of course, behavior affects chemistry, and before you know it, you really got a problem here in a vicious cycle. So mindfulness meditation is just symptom management today, but very effective symptom management. And that's fine, but what I question is the limitations of stopping short of symptom management and not actually achieving a deeper transformation. As I said, Zen is the oldest psychotherapy known to man, and it was the first to actually observe how our thoughts affected our behaviors and distorted our reality, and then had a sort of proposed solution to it, a sort of systematic way of bringing about a better resolution. And this was different than simply religion or philosophy that attempted to give you a sort of a new program. With Zen, there was no new program. It was just removing the old program. It was actually a stripping of any concept or idea or belief, and just sort of realigning you with nature. The idea was that along the way, our thoughts became sort of self-defeating in a way, inevitably self-defeating, really, to some degree. So let's talk about the principles of Zen quickly here, without going into too much about Zen. So the core principle of Zen essentially is that we all have a conditioned sense of self. We can call it the ego, and that this sense of self exists in time. It's thought-based, and it's incessant, meaning these thoughts have to keep going in order for the ego to survive, right? If you stop thinking long enough, your identification with thoughts begins to break down. So that's why the ego is continually thinking. It's continually giving itself insight into who it is. And it's all in time. It's looking at the future, and it's looking at the past. The only place that the ego can't really exist, as a sense of self, is in this current moment. That's when, when you stop thinking and you just sit here and be, that's where you begin to get insecure on a self-identification level anyway. But then something really remarkable happens, that if you sit there long enough like that, if you break that incessant thought process long enough, something very beautiful begins to arise within you. You actually have a state of what people have called being, or a deeper sense of self that's not directly related to non-stop thinking of that voice in your head telling you who you are and reaffirming who you are or reaffirming what you're not. So the idea here is being, or a deeper sense of self and instinct, versus the persona or the creation of this external reflection of who we think we are. And it's kind of a hard concept, but it's a very important concept to get if you're going to really understand just a basic understanding of ego theory through the lens of modern psychology today and through Buddhism. So simply put, who you are is deeper than what you think you are. And we might all say, well, yeah, of course. But then look at why we don't stop thinking, the incessant thoughts. See how that continuous stream of self-analysis can actually lead us astray from these core instincts of who we really are, and even repaint or put on an entirely different mask of who we think we are versus actually what we are. And how does that affect our life? How can that lead us into concepts and careers and people and relationships and things that we may not otherwise really even instinctually navigate ourselves towards? Now we have this sort of false compass directing our life, and it's all based in our identification and how we were raised and what environment and how our family thought of us and how our friends thought of us and what kind of music do we listen to and what's the themes in that particular culture, and did we adopt those things, and if we did, what's expected of us, and how does that influence the way we navigate through our life and how we in return symbolize and perceive ourselves. These are really important concepts, and they are kind of hard to grasp at first, but they're fundamental to what really makes our minds tick and what makes us or breaks us perceptually. So again, sustained presence breaks the magnetic cycle of identification, that it breaks the incessant stream of thought. And that's what Zen meditation or Zen Buddhism, that's basically the whole entire system of thought, if you will. But psychology has stripped it down. We've just taken the mindfulness meditation. That's what we call it, mindfulness meditation. It's essentially just taking the meditative aspect of it, and we stop short of the philosophy and the belief again. And like I said, it gives you symptom management, but it doesn't bring about a deeper transformation. And it can't, because it stops short. It doesn't allow enough sustained time and understanding, enough sustained presence to really start breaking down those hard core identifications with thought. And here's one of the reasons why. There's a phenomenon when you start to meditate. At first, it's difficult. You can't get your mind to stop thinking. Your mind's all over the place. The more you try to relax and focus, the more your mind wants to be like a monkey just jumping around and every tree in your mind. But then eventually you get past that and you start to reach these peaceful, no mind or low thought phases. And if you keep going past that, something sort of fearful starts to arise, a sort of subtle anxiety, a sense of maybe your identity, your ego starts to get a little bit vulnerable, and it realizes that, and it sort of starts to put up a fight, and it's fighting to come back because the ego knows that it exists in time and exists in the future and exists in the past. It has to keep reflecting itself by some measure of time. If you stay in the present long enough, your ego is literally threatened with death. Presence is an ego death, and that's why our ego and our identities resist the present moment so viciously. And of course, the irony there is that's what creates a lot of suffering for us. Psychology recognizes this. Zen Buddhism recognizes this. Many philosophies have recognized this. One needs only to look at their self and have an experience to really see this for themselves. So hopefully in the future, psychology will explore Zen meditation and Zen Buddhism a little deeper, and we can get past this stigma of religion and religiosity that's been associated with Buddhism, because it's really a philosophy or an advanced psychotherapy that has so much more to offer than mere symptom management. Symptom management is great, but that's just the beginning. I'm going to talk a little more about this in another video, specifically about self and cognitive schema, which will kind of provide a little more of a scientific basis for what the ego is and how Zen or mindfulness meditation actually works to break it down and bring about change.